to another edition. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Model Aviation Live. I'm Jay Smith, your host, and I'm coming to you from my home office. And the first thing I want to share with you, because we've technically just started our build month, although build month is October, the digital edition of the October issue comes out on the 15th. So on the 15th of this month, September 15th, you would have been able to get that. So let me share something really neat with you really quick, since we're talking about building, and this is a little bit different. I know usually we're talking about airplanes, and this is an airboat, but this is actually a waterboard by Stevens Aero Model. It's electric, as you can see, and Stevens Aero Model carries a couple of different airboats. And when I was a kid, I grew up with a Dumas airboat, and this particular airboat was built by my father, and we had a lot of fun running it in Maine. We have a family cabin in Maine on a lake, and we had a lot of fun running it on the lake. And I just thought it was something different. I know sometimes I show you projects, airplanes that I've built or whatnot, and I was just thinking that this would be a neat project to show you that you can get from Stevens Aero Model. It runs on a 2S LiPo, and it has a, obviously has a cover here where you can get to the electronics. So I'll also share with you real quick, if you're familiar with Bill Stevens at Stevens Aero Model, I'll share a really quick story with you. A few years ago, I was at the Toledo Expo and show in Toledo, Ohio, and it was after the show, and I ran into Bill and his son, and we were chatting a little bit, and he knew that I had an arcade at my house and had video games, so he was asking me about that, and I told him about it, and I told him, where a forum you could go to for video games. So then I got a call from him, and he said, I'm going to pick up a pole position. That's the racing game where it has the shifter and the pedals on the floor that it's a standing game, and from the 80s. And so Bill actually got a pole position, and he knew I had one. So I gave him some tips on what to check and make sure it works. So if you ever talk to Bill Stevens, whenever he has downtime at his shop, he and his son and his family take turns trying to beat each other's score on pole position. So if you call Bill Stevens, ask him how good he's getting at pole position. All right, so I mentioned build month. So build month officially is in October, but since the digital edition is out now, from September 15th to October 31st, you can get a 20% discount from our plan service. So if you head over to our plan service anytime from now till October 31st, you can take a look at thousands of plans. If you haven't found yet a build project that you want to take on, now's a great time to find that build project. Also keep in mind in the October issue that there's going to be free plans that you can download. But just want to remind you of the plan sale, and that the issue is out now for those that have digital. Also want to talk to you a little bit about the focus for next year in the magazine. I want to focus on clubs, specifically because that's going to be a focus for all of AMA next year. Obviously we always look after our clubs and focus on our clubs, but we're going to provide, a little bit extra focus, and we're going to try to provide more assistance to our clubs. So I see the magazine as a great place to share tips and information and success stories. So if you have a club, or you're a club officer and your club has had a successful event, or you're working with your local community, or maybe you've made your club handicapped accessible, or anything like that, or you've added a solar charging station to your club, anything like that that you think would be beneficial to other clubs, please reach out to me, and we definitely like to share those stories. Could be a feature article in the magazine. It could be, if you provided us with a video, we could share the video on social media. But we definitely want to capture these success stories. Or maybe you have an idea on how to grow club membership. We want to do that. We'd like to share that. So just be thinking about that, and would love to share articles throughout the year and videos. And just reach out to me. It's jays@modelaircraft.org, or you can email me through modelaviation.com, or you can, obviously give me a call at AMA. My extension is 225. I would definitely love to talk to you about how we can share your success story, but not only that, how we can help the other 2,400 or so clubs across the United States. Well, as you know, if you watched last month, my plan was to have both people that helped us with the fighter face-off, the previous fighter face-off, and the current fighter face-off. So that was Derek Micko and Paul Kohlmann. My plan was to have them both on the show last month. Unfortunately, Paul was not able to attend, but he has graciously agreed to joining us this time and talk about his contributions, not only to fighter face-off, but he's also written many articles about build projects and how to set up your workshop and the tools that you might need. So I'd like to welcome Paul to our show.
Hey, Jay, thanks for that.
Hey, Paul, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Well, before we delve into what you've done for the magazine, for those that might not be familiar with you, let's start at the beginning of your modeling career. How did you get involved? Was it a parent or a friend, or what led you to this great hobby?
Well, oddly, it was my daughter, actually. She's about 2, and we were at an air show, our local air show here in Santa Rosa, California. And there was a gentleman flying at the full-scale air show. In the morning when it's still pretty foggy here, they would have our local RC club fly. And a fellow named John Reed was flying one of those old, hang on a second.
Well, we'll give Paul a second to finish telling us the story about a full-scale air show. In fact, there's a full-scale air show here locally this weekend, and the simulator experience trailer is going to be there. So we're excited to provide that support. And obviously, full-scale air shows are a great place to share the love of aero modeling, because obviously everyone that attends a full-scale air show has some interest in aircraft of all types. When I lived in Florida, I used to go to MacDill Air Force Base. They used to have an air show every year. And I actually met Colonel Robert Morgan, who was the pilot of Memphis Belle. And he wrote a book called The Man Who Flew the Memphis Belle. So I got him to autograph the book and got to meet him and hear his story. And of course, I also got to see a lot of incredible aircraft. Unfortunately, that same air show, Paul Tibbets was supposed to be there. And some of you may be familiar with him, that he flew the first bomber mission with the atomic bomb. He was the pilot, and he was also supposed to be at the air show, but he had some health issues and sadly wasn't able to be there. But that his aircraft is in the Smithsonian, and the bomber that he flew is in the Smithsonian, the B-52. And it turns out that the MacDill Air Force Base show, it was interesting because Colonel Morgan actually was stationed at MacDill, prior to that. So it was really neat. It was like they looked at it as like a homecoming for him, to bring him back and have him talk about that. So definitely, I'm a big fan of air shows. We have one in Indianapolis, a full-scale air show as well. So if you have a full-scale air show, it might be a great place for your club to think about going and either possibly flying if they'll allow that, or setting up and showcasing your models. It's definitely a great way to share that. And that's what we've done here at the air show in Indianapolis. Or if you have an aviation museum. Hey, Paul, you're back.
Sorry. My wife decided to durability test the garage door, but I think she's done with that now. Anyways, thanks for filling the air there. I'd like to build on your comment. Our club, the Wine Country Flyers, we flew for many years at our local air show. Like I said, it tends to be foggy here in the morning. And so our club would fly just to put something in the air while we were waiting for the full-size guys to be able to fly. It was a great opportunity to set up, display a lot of airplanes, meet a lot of people, and we got a lot of new members every fall when we did that. Unfortunately, our air show doesn't exist anymore. Our airport got too busy for it. So this will be the first year that we don't have it. But it is a great opportunity. I strongly suggest clubs to check any local air shows. It's a great opportunity.
So I want to point out George's comment real quick, because I was kind of ad-libbing there while we were waiting for Paul to join us. So I was talking about that I almost had the chance to meet Paul Tibbets, and he flew the B-29 called the Enola Gay. I don't know if you heard what I was saying, Paul, but I did go to an air show and met the gentleman who flew the Memphis Belle.
Right.
But Paul Tibbets was also supposed to be there. So thank you, George. I was kind of ad-libbing, and so I appreciate you providing that information. So it started out with the air show, as you mentioned, and where did it go from there?
Well, so this gentleman was flying one of those GWS ladybugs that used to be everywhere back,
Yes.
15, 20 years ago. And my daughter just loved that thing, and it just made her laugh so hard she couldn't stop. And I thought, I want to have one of those just so I can brighten her day up like that. And I thought it would be a fun thing. It wasn't a very easy airplane to learn to fly from scratch. So actually I had to back up quite a ways and go through, a proper trainer and work my way up to that, as it turned out. But that's what got me started. My daughter, actually, she just really loved it so much at that air show. Sadly, that's about as far as her attention span for RC aircraft went, but that's what got me started.
Right. Well, it's interesting you mentioned GWS because I would say probably my first electric was a Gentle Lady, a Carl Goldberg Gentle Lady. But when I wanted to get into park flyers, my first park flyer was a GWS Tiger Moth. So, and actually, as it turned out, it was a very popular airplane, and we flew at the middle school that I used to attend, years before, and I got permission from the principal to fly there. And so we had what would, be classified as a park pilot club, and we flew, probably 8 to 12 people, and everybody ended up getting Tiger Moths, and we'd fly them all together first thing in the morning, and we do, touch and goes and group, group maneuvers and whatnot. And unfortunately, at one point, one person lost their Tiger Moth because many of them were yellow if the people didn't repaint them, and they were watching the wrong Tiger Moth, and theirs flew away. And since we were all flying, we didn't know where it went because we were all, watching, so no one knew which way it went. And I've told this story before, but I also flew at that field at the middle school. I flew the Tiger Moth World Tour Tiger Moth. That it was created on RC groups, and it was flown all through the U.S. and I think it went to Hawaii, and it actually came. We actually flew it there at Osceola Middle School, where I went to middle school, and Glenn Lewis was there.
Oh, really?
And Glenn Lewis flew that airplane, and Glenn Lewis is the person that connected us. So it wasn't intentional, but you gave me a good lead-in talking about GWS because Glenn Lewis used to race RC cars with me when I was like 7 or 8 years old. And we were sponsored by Bowlink, and we used to race cars in Tampa, Florida at a mall parking lot. And fortunately for us, one of the people that raced with us, his name was Frankie, and he was the head equipment coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So he managed to get us this spot in the parking lot that only could be used for racing cars, and they repaved it for us. And so he would bring football players out on like a Saturday or Sunday to run cars. So I got to meet like Leroy Selman, who was the first Buccaneer to ever make it in the Hall of Fame. And I got to meet Ron Woodard. And then, I don't want to go too far out in the weeds with this story, but I actually got to go to a practice game and got to go and meet the players in the locker room and all this because of Frankie. But the point of the story is that's where I first met Glenn Lewis, because we had a sponsorship for Bowlink. So we were on the same team. We were literally on the same racing team. And then as I got older, we lost contact with each other, because when I was probably about 17, I took a break from hobbies. And then it turns out that I reconnected with him through RC groups and through flying at Osceola Middle School. And we didn't know it because, I was a kid the last time he saw me, and I didn't know he was the person on our team. So one day, we go to a flying event at the Largo Flying Club, and we've actually featured them before, the Largo Flying Club. We went to they had an all-electric event, and we go together. And he mentions to me about how he used to hand wind motors when he used to race RC cars. And I just, out of the blue, and I said, really? I used to race RC cars too. I used to race over at the mall in Tampa. And he's like, I used to race there too. He goes, I was sponsored by Bowlink. And I go, so was I. And he goes, you're Little Jay? And the reason he called me Little Jay is my father's name is Jay. As most people know, my father owned a hobby shop. His name is Jay. So when I was a kid learning to fly and run cars, I was Little Jay. So he looks at me and he goes, you're Little Jay? So I came home and I looked through my photo album, and I had a picture of the two of us together, and I scanned it and sent it, and I'm like 7 years old, and I don't know how old Glenn was at that time. But anyway, to get back to you working on the Grumman Goose, I spoke to Glenn And I said, I really want a Grumman Goose. I really want a construction article on a Grumman Goose. People are asking for, float planes and water planes. And I think this would be a really cool model. And I asked Glenn, do you want to do it? Because Glenn is a great builder, and he didn't have the time to take it on. And he referred me to you, and that's how we connected. And you thankfully took on the project. And what's great about that is it's turned out to be the best-selling plan that we sell at the AMA. Of all the plans at the AMA Plan Service, it's the best selling one that we have. So if you don't mind, Paul, take us through a little bit about, that project and you designing that project and whether or not you still fly the model, and, just a tidbit, because maybe people watching this aren't familiar with that project and maybe they'd like to build one.
Yeah, actually, I am thankful to Glenn. He's a buddy that I met on RC groups, and we're both engineers. Actually, he was out here on the West Coast for training, and we did get to meet quite a few years ago now. But yeah, he did make the connection, and it was kind of funny. The Goose is a neat airplane, but it's not really an airplane I normally would have gravitated toward. I'm more a Warbirds guy, but yeah, it sounded fun. So I started working on the design, and the more I learned about the Goose as I was designing and building it, the more I fell in love with it. It's just a great airplane, cool history. So I did hold on to that airplane. It's actually over my head right now in the rack. It hasn't flown for the last few years because sadly we lost our club pond. The video shown now, I'm flying it at Lake Sonoma, which I could still fly there, but it's a little more of a hassle to get there, and there's more boat traffic and such. But the airplane's still all in one piece, and I thought about donating it to the AMA museum, actually. But when I mentioned that to my wife, she got kind of upset about it. She loves that airplane out of everything I've designed and built so far. She really wasn't too pleased at me turning loose of it, even so that it could go to the museum. But
wow.
But yeah, it still exists, and it's in great shape, and it's a really nice flyer. It will be hard to turn loose of it, but I do expect to offer it to the museum at some point. And as far as it being so popular, I wish I could tell you why that is. Out of all the airplanes in your inventory, there's many wonderful things in there, but I wish I could figure that one out, because I'd love to do it again. But there's something about that airplane. People just love that Grumman Goose. Not just mine, but the Grumman Goose generally.
Right. It really worked out. It was a great project, and obviously it got us working together. And then after that, you did a lot of projects for us. You wrote a whole series about getting started in building and how to read plans and how to, figure out what tools you would need to build. And, you took us through the whole build process. And, I don't never ask you this, Paul, but what was that like for you? I mean, to take everything that you knew as a builder and try to put it in writing and provide the photographs. Was it hard? Was it easy?
Well, the writing part wasn't really hard, and pulling the materials together wasn't hard. What was a little bit hard was that I hadn't really been in the hobby all that long at that time. I'd probably been in RC for maybe 6-7 years or so. I've been pretty handy and done a lot of different types of hobbies and trades in my life, but I felt a little weird because I could hardly say I was truly an authority on RC when I hadn't been in it all that long. So I was kind of curious what the feedback would be from readers showing, gee, this guy thinks he knows everything. And actually that isn't what happened. I got a lot of great feedback from new builders and from very experienced builders. And it turned out to be a lot more supportive readership than I would have expected. And that made it a lot of fun. So that series, it started out, I think we're only going to do 5 or 6 articles, and it went on to more like 12 or 13 by the time it was done. We got so much support that, I wouldn't say it went to my head, but it certainly made me a lot more comfortable sharing what I know. And I certainly learned everything that I know from somebody else. There's not much I've invented in this hobby, if anything. But it was fun to try to package it into chapters and make it more approachable for people that are getting into the hobby. That was very rewarding.
Well, I know that, we also put those articles on the website, much like we also put the first Fighter Face Off. I mean, ultimately, we're going to talk about the Park Flyer edition of the Fighter Face Off, but we did the first Fighter Face Off. And so, as I said, we had Derek Micko on to talk about that last month. And I'll tell you that the page where we have the information from the first Fighter Face Off on the modaviation.com website, that page, our web traffic to that page went up by 75% after the show.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So people, are watching the show that maybe weren't aware of it or forgotten about it, or maybe they weren't AMA members when that issue was published. So we've gotten a lot of traffic. And so I asked, Derek the same question, but I'm curious from your viewpoint, Paul, how did that all come about? I remember you pitched the idea to me, but tell everyone watching, like, how that project came about. And then secondly, why you chose the aircraft you chose.
Sure. Yeah. Derek's another guy that I met through RC groups. And a few years after we had been chatting, because the two of us began designing similarly sized and constructed warbirds. And Derek was out here at the Woodland Davis Scale Masters meet. And that's not very far from where I live. It's only about an hour away. And so my son and I drove out to meet Derek. And since that time, we've met one another several times. But we got talking, since we do design in a similar way and similar subject matter, wouldn't it be fun to design two airplanes that had opposed one another? And that was an interesting idea, but man, it was difficult to down select to two airplanes. There's a lot of combinations that are pretty obvious, like a Spitfire and a Messerschmitt 109, but there's a lot of Spitfires and 109s out there. So we want to get a little bit off of the beaten track. And we thought we had it locked down many, many times, but just kept changing our mind. There's just so many great airplanes out there and so little time to design and build. Ultimately, we down selected to the I-16 that Derek did, partly because he had done a smaller model and people really liked it, and they had been pushing him to build a bigger one for quite a few years. Then when I started looking at aircraft that had opposed the 116, the P-36 is an airplane I really love, and it's undermodeled, as is the I-16, and the pieces kind of fell into place. What was a little bit surprising was how those two airplanes came into contact. Obviously, the I-16 was flown by the Russian Air Force, but the P-36 was a little bit of a longer story. The aircraft that fought with the I-16, they were actually French aircraft originally that were captured when the Germans overtook France, and then the Germans sold them to Finland to try to keep a bulwark between the Soviet Union and countries that were not directly in opposition with Germany. So it was a strange combination, but that's how we ended up with those two airplanes.
And was that aircraft that you designed for Fighter Face Off, was that the largest aircraft you designed to that date?
It was. Actually, the Goose is 49 inches, and I'd done a 50-inch airplane. A lot of my stuff was at 30 inches. So jumping up to 60 inches was the biggest that I had taken on so far.
So, and was it, for the first Fighter Face Off, was it Derek who picked the aircraft first and then you picked the opposing aircraft?
That's right.
Right. Because I voted for, there was a poll. He had a poll on RC Group, and I voted because I wanted him to build the aircraft that he ultimately built, because I just think it's a really interesting looking aircraft. That version, and there's a biplane version. And
right.
I think they're both very interesting. So I actually voted for it, and it ended up winning because I think he had a few, like 3 or 4 or something to that effect that you could vote for, and I voted for it.
Yeah, that was fun. Getting a little bit of crowd participation there was good.
So you were seeing the video where you both, it was really cool that you got together and you flew the aircraft. And I think you kind of did a little bit of mock dogfighting, probably the first time you'd ever done that. How did that go? I mean, how did the flight together go?
Well, it was done in stages, actually. Since we had never flown together before, we started out with, we had some foamies that I lent Derek one of my airplanes, and And he flew it by himself, and I flew another one by myself, and just kind of warmed up, saw how one another tends to fly. And then we flew the two foamies at the same time and got comfortable with one another. Uh, and then we flew each of our fighter face-off airplanes separately and got as much footage as we could. And then when we felt like we had enough, that even if we stacked the two airplanes in the first 30 seconds, well, we could probably still make a video out of what we had. At that point, then we began to fly the two face-off airplanes together. And that was fun, but we still were a little cautious until we knew we had enough footage. And then on the last day that we were together, we figured we had nothing to lose, and then we really wrung those two airplanes out, flying at the same time. And that's when it got really fun. So the two airplanes, performance-wise, are matched pretty well. They weigh about the same, and of course the wingspans are the same, etc. But it was a lot of fun, just chasing one another around. We just had nothing to lose at that point, and we literally flew until the sun went down.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great.
So was it when you both flew together, and you basically came to the end of this project? Did you both determine or talk about that day when you flew together, let's do another one of these, or did that come later?
Oh, we knew we were going to do it again. These projects, they take at least a year. And of course, if you add the hemming and hawing as to what airplane you're going to do, because there's just so many choices, it's more than that. So it usually takes us months just to nail down what airplane we're going to finally settle on. And then between the design phase and the building and all the maiden flight and documentation and such, it's easily a year. So we were well into that process, but already talking about what we'd like to do next time around. So it's a pretty safe bet you'll see a couple more of these happen.
Well, I was trying to convince Derek that you all needed to do a World War I version.
Well, that's not impossible. We bandied about with Cold War jets, maybe doing a pair of EDFs. We have thought about doing twins from World War II. Gosh, we've got a whole bunch of different combos. Like I said, it's so hard to nail it down because there's so many fun things to do. The fact that it takes a year, you really have to pick well because you're stuck with the project for quite a while. But that's the toughest part, is just down selecting.
Right. There's so many cool airplanes to choose from.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let's transition a little bit into going into the Park Flyer edition. So what made you decide to go smaller the second time?
I guess COVID. I slowed down a bit on the designing and building, but Derek went into overdrive. He started building a lot of what he's been calling Comet-inspired aircraft and some other airplanes that are 27 to 30 inches, I believe. And a lot of us have been cooped up, and he just started building on a smaller scale, but he was pumping these airplanes out in record time. And I saw what he was doing in RC groups, and we're talking, just texting back and forth and a phone call here and there. And I liked what he was doing. And his theory was there's a lot of people cooped up that normally wouldn't be building, and maybe they don't have that much room or so much experience to pull off a 60-inch project, but maybe there's a market for people that are interested in smaller projects. And sounded like a good idea, and I hadn't done a smaller project in quite a while, and so I liked the idea. So we jumped in and did that. We went back to our 30-inch roots.
And so this time around, you got to choose the aircraft, and then Derek had to choose the opposing aircraft, correct?
That's right. And I cheated a little bit because I have probably 6 or 7 airplanes that are already started in my CAD program where they're just the shape. And I had a Brewster Buffalo. It's one of the ones that I wanted to do, but the Brewster Buffalo has a peculiar landing gear, and it's certainly doable to make scale landing gear for it, but it's a project unto itself. Well, if I put that airplane back in the 30-inch category where it's just going to be a belly flopper, I can skip the difficulties with the landing gear and still check that box of designing a Brewster Buffalo. So that's how I came up with that, and then that put him in a position where he needed to come up with an airplane that had opposed it. And of course, he had an interest in his K-27, the Nate. So that was a pretty good combination. The Nate and the Buffalo met in Burma and Malaysia when the RAF was flying Buffaloes, and there was quite a bit of interaction between those two aircraft in that area in the early stages of the war.
And I think at least that there was hope that you both might get together and fly the two airplanes, and it probably will happen. But as you said, due to COVID, it's probably going to be delayed. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I thought that we would do that. That was definitely part of the plan. But between COVID and some other circumstances, it just hasn't worked out yet.
Well, that's the good thing about models. They're always there, waiting in your hangar for when you're ready to fly them, right?
That's true. Yeah, it's I'm looking at it right now. It's just hanging there in the rack, waiting for the opportunity. I've been flying it sparingly because I do want to get together with Derek, and sometimes things happen when you're flying these airplanes. You never know. So that one's kind of on reserve right now.
So we kind of ran it. The articles are running kind of interestingly. So the first article came out in the September issue, and that was just about Derek's aircraft. And then the October issue that people can see now digitally, and people will see soon with print, which I think we'll have we can probably show you a little sneak peek of that. But the October article, we have the second part of Derek's article, and then we also have the beginning of your article, and then your article wraps up in the November issue. So your plan will not be available to the November issue because I think you were just finalizing and making sure everything was right. So for everyone to be aware that your plan won't be available till the November issue, but both plans, just like every plan we put in Model Aviation, are for free digital download. If you want a printed copy, obviously, then you can purchase that from the plan service. And hey, if you purchase it between now and October 31st, you get 20% off. So now would probably be the time. So here we are looking at the article, a sneak peek of the article, so people can get a better look at your airplane. So for those that haven't seen this article yet, Paul, the people that get digital and are waiting to get their print, what will they learn in this article about building the aircraft that you chose?
Well, they're going to get most of the framework. So the tail group will be covered, and the construction of the fuselage and the cowling. It has this airplane has a built-up cowling, so there's a framework that needs to be planked. So that might be a little different for some builders, but it's a fairly small project, so it's a good learning opportunity for those interested in trying that out. But it'll get through about 2/3 of the framework, and the rest of it will be covered in November.
And we didn't talk about it actually when I interviewed Derek last month, but maybe we should touch on really briefly about Manzano Laser. So obviously, I'll let you speak to that a little bit, Paul. But as I said, we're offering free digital plans to anyone on our website, and then you can get a printed plan if you would desire that from our plan service. But you can also get a little help on the build side, and you've worked with Manzano Laser Works, I think, on all your projects. So I'll let you speak a little bit to what's available in that regard.
Yeah, actually, all of the aircraft that I've designed, and the same with Derek, they're all available through Manzano. Tom Jacoby over in New Mexico, he cuts these kits and does a great job. It's kind of funny. I'm a little spoiled because all of my kits and the prototypes are laser cut. Both Derek and I have set these plans up so that all the outlines are there for folks that do want a hand cut. And I'm surprised that quite a few builders do. And if you plug away, you can certainly make that happen. These aircraft, they're designed with laser in mind from the beginning. So there's a lot of notches and complicated shapes and such. But yeah, with a little will, you can certainly cut them out. But for those that are a little perhaps less industrious like me, you can order a kit and spend more time building than cutting. But it's all a labor of love, I suppose. So it just depends on where you want to enter your project.
So the skills that someone would need to build your current project, with the fighter face off, do you think, Paul, that could be a first build project for someone, or do you think that they should have another build under their belt before they would take on either yours or Derek's project?
That's a really good question. I'm pretty pig-headed, so I tend to jump in pretty deep when I start a new hobby. It's certainly doable if you have some basic skills, woodworking skills, or some type of technical skills and handwork. I wouldn't say it's impossible. It's a little more challenging than some other projects out there. And I'm speaking specifically to the 30-inch project like this Brewster Buffalo or Derek's Nate Fighter. It's certainly doable, especially with RC groups. There's a build thread for each of these airplanes. So there's tons of photos, much more than what we can fit in the magazine articles. The articles give a good overview with a reasonable amount of detail. But if that's not enough for a new builder, there's a lot more help there on RC groups.
Well, not only that, but not only that, as we talked about, they could go back and look at all the articles you wrote previously a few years ago about taking people through from start to finish, all the skills and the tools and everything that would be required.
True. Yeah, that's true. There's quite a few articles that cover important skills like sheeting or the planking mentioned earlier, where it's just broken down into techniques. By the time you got through all those articles, which it's not a tremendous amount of literature, but there's quite a bit of description and photographs of the basic skills that you would need. So yeah, I agree with your statement there.
So of all the projects that you've built, do you still have them all? I asked Derek that same question. I said, have you gotten rid of any of them? And he said, not on purpose. So, so I'm curious for you, you've designed and built several aircraft. Do you still have them all?
I have them all but one, actually. And I sold the small Messerschmitt 109 at a swap meet. I really like 109s, and I have a bunch of them. So I let that one go, but all my prototypes I still have. It's hard to let them go, but I'm looking in the rafters here. There's 14 of them now, and that's a lot. That's more than I really need. But yeah, I love all these airplanes, or I wouldn't have designed and built them in the first place. I have crashed a couple of them, including one of them that I had an ESC failure on the maiden flight, and that airplane hit the concrete runway from probably 50 feet up, just straight in. And that was a major rebuild, but it did come back and live to fly again. So yeah, I have all of the original prototypes except for the one.
And do you have a favorite? I mean, of all the airplanes that you've designed and built, is there a favorite?
Well, to fly, I really love the Goose. It is just such a sweet flying airplane. It's probably the most lightly loaded airplane that I have, and it flies great just scooting off the grass, but flying off the water is just so much fun. And it's in the morning when the pond or the lake is real glassy. It's just so pretty. But really, overall, the airplane that I love the most is that Hawk that we just saw. It's just a brutish looking little airplane, especially the camouflage that the Finnish Air Force put on it. It just looks really mean. And I just like that airplane a lot. It flies really well. It's quite a bit faster, but that's the one that I just like to look at the most, and the one that I'm the most proud of.
So for you, Paul, how do you decide on your next project? I mean, how do you pick the aircraft? Is it just aircraft that you've liked throughout your lifetime, or do you go purposely looking for projects, looking at either museum websites or just looking at aviation history, or maybe there's a history around a certain airplane and that draws you to it? I mean, generally speaking, what draws you to your projects?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes.
All the above.
Pretty much all of those things. Yeah, the P-51 was a great airplane, but I'm not so sure the modeling world needs a P-51 from me. There's a lot of them out there. So there's a little bit of a dance, though. I really love to see other people build these airplanes. It's incredible to see my design coming together on somebody else's building board on the other side of the world or the other side of the country. It's really cool. So part of that means that you don't want to build something so obscure that no one else is ever going to be interested in it. So there's a bit of a middle of the road. It needs to be something interesting, but not overly done. So that still leaves you an awful lot of projects. So there are some airplanes that I just love, and I always have. I did a Ki-61, the Tony fighter, the Japanese fighter, and I just love that since I was a young boy. It's just a great looking airplane. So that one was obvious I was going to do that someday. And I did that as a 30-inch airplane. Some other ones, like the Douglas Devastator that I did a couple of years ago, that one is an airplane that some friends of mine just loved, and they just kept poking at me to do it. I could have taken it or left it, but they really wanted to see it happen, so I did it. And the more I learned about it as I was building it, the more I fell in love with it. Actually, my grandfather was an engineer at Douglas in the war years, so I did have some attachment to it, although that was pretty early in his career. But sometimes it's just things that other people convince me to do. But actually on the board behind me here is my current project, and that is it's an update of the Hawk design where it's getting a new nose to become a P-40B. So I love P-40s. This is super easy. I just have to design from, the second former on the Hawk forward, put a longer nose on it, and that's it. So that one will be a pretty easy build, and we'll probably see that finished up the next 6 months or so.
Do you only build one thing at a time and from start to finish, or do you ever have two projects going at the same time?
It's pretty rare I do two. A lot of people really love just having a bunch of different projects in different states, but I don't. I really like to think a lot about the project I'm working on. It's part of why I find it interesting. Work is stressful. A lot of things about life are stressful, but one thing I can control is the build that I'm working on. I tend to think about it and break it down into, what are the next 8 or 10 steps that I'm going to do so that the steps fit together. I build it in my mind as I'm going to sleep. If I was trying to do 2 or 3 at a time, I think it would just be a mess. Just that way of unwinding, using that project as a means of unwinding. I don't see that working anymore. So I really love having the one project that I just mastered.
So, obviously, like we talked about, you've done a lot of build projects for us, and you've done a lot of building tutorial stories for us. So thinking about your own journey in, starting either designing and constructing aircraft, if you could, go back and tell yourself one thing, what would it be? I mean, what tip or what information do you wish you had? Do you wish you knew when you started the journey of designing and building your own model aircraft?
That's a good question. I saw a comment the other day from another builder that said every project would look better if you used a few more sheets of sandpaper. And I stopped and thought about it and realized I am so that. Just, when I get to the point where the framing's all done and the shaping is generally done and we're ready to cover, I just want to move on. And so generally the finish of my airframes, it's not quite as good as it ought to be if I was competing, which I don't. But if I was, these projects would just look a bit better if they got a little more attention before going into the covering phase. So yeah, that extra sheet of sandpaper would pay off.
Rachel Hahn that works in the publications department, she wrote an article a few months ago about, like we talked about, with people being home a bit more with the pandemic, that it seems to have led people back to building more, or, going back to RC or control line or free flight. Basically they have some spare time and they want to get back to those projects or get back to the hobbies that maybe they haven't had the time for. Have you seen that? I mean, either with you personally, or have you had people reach out to you and with questions about the articles you've written, or maybe people you fly with or that I mean, what's been your experience during this pandemic as far as building and flying?
I would say that interest has increased. I wouldn't say it in my personal experience that it's doubled or tripled, but yeah, I have gotten more emails from people just with questions. Talk to more people in the club that are building projects where they might have built before, but maybe they had a project going or maybe not. All those people now do have something going. So yeah, it's gotten a bit busier.
I think it's great that whether it's this hobby or another hobby, it's great for people to have. I mean, obviously we don't want to be in a pandemic, but I mean, having that time is great, for people to. I shared a story that, obviously I had no way of knowing, but around December or January of last year or the year before, it was somewhere between December and January, I bought an Atari 2600 because I used to have one as a kid and I don't know what happened to it. And I just had the urge to, play the old Atari. I mean, I tried emulators and they're okay. So I bought an Atari 2600 on eBay and I bought about 25 games for it. And it was kind of reminiscent of my childhood. And when I grew up, the next door neighbor had an Intellivision and I had the Atari. So we would go back and forth depending on which game we wanted to play. And so, when unfortunately things happened with the pandemic, I'd only had it a couple of months. And so I spent for the first month or two, I spent a lot of time playing all those 25 games. And I even remember back then, if you got a really high score, you could send in a picture, like a Polaroid picture of your screen, and they would give you a patch. And I used to have like patches for different games like Pitfall and Laser Blast. And so anyway, I think it's great. I definitely like to see people coming back to our hobby or getting back to building. But I mean, I think it's great for anybody to take the time for hobbies. Because as you mentioned that this hobby is great, especially if you're, having other stresses. Building model airplanes and flying model airplanes is a great way to spend your time. And it's a great community. And I'm guessing your experience and also Derek's experience, in the interactions you've had on RC groups, like you mentioned, you met Glenn and you met Derek, but also the interactions you have through all our readers on Model Aviation that reach out to you with questions or tips. I mean, I'm sure that really, and then ultimately seeing people build the aircraft you design, I imagine all of that is just really heartwarming for you.
It certainly is. It's a lot of fun. Like I said, it's really cool to see my project in somebody else's shop. It's always a little weird at first, but it's a lot of fun, and people reach out regularly with questions, and the questions might be specific to the airplane I design, or they might be a general question, but I'm always happy to answer those questions if it helps somebody that's building something. Our community of builders is really strong. We're all concerned that as a hobby, fewer and fewer people are getting into building these days, and that's true for all of the hobbies. It's just a different world now. You can get anything you want for pretty cheap, just delivered to your door, so people don't build trains or clocks or woodwork as much as they used to. Actually, COVID has put a bump in all of those hobbies, but they're still less common than they used to be. So most builders would love to help anyone out if just keep them more engaged in the hobby, and I certainly feel that way.
So as I mentioned, the readers are just going to start reading about your Buffalo project in the issue that they have now digitally. They'll have it in print later this month, and then they'll see the rest of your article in the November issue. Obviously, as you said, there's a lot of details in there to help them through the build process. But I'm assuming probably since you wrote the article, you may have had a little bit more time to fly the airplane. So is there any additional information or tips or thoughts that you have if someone, that may not be in the magazine? Is there anything else you'd want to share with someone who wants to take this project on?
Well, that's a good question. Like I mentioned, I actually haven't flown it all that much since the second article was written. It's just kind of sitting there on hold until I get together with Derek. This is always a tricky statement, but you don't want to pat yourself on the back too much, but the little Buffalo, it really does fly very well. It's a little heavier than the Wildcat, the 30-inch Wildcat that I did as the very first project I did, but it actually, I think it flies a little better. Really no bad habits, so there's not much to worry about there. If it's built per the plan, don't make it any heavier than it is. So it's always interesting, when people build their airplane, it's their project, so they can do whatever they want. It's not unusual. I'll see somebody that's really driven to put a much bigger motor in or a much bigger battery or whatever, and it's their project. So obviously they can do that. But the airplane's really designed to come in a certain weight, and if you stick with that, it should be a very good flyer for you. If it's just built straight and true, take your time, and really not a lot to add as far as the building goes. I think it's all in there in the articles.
What about, you do mention the flying characteristics a little bit in the article, but anything you want to share on what to expect for the first flight?
Good question. I was going to comment, I think you had a picture there of me hand launching it. And
yeah,
when you posted it earlier while we were preparing, it made me laugh. Don't launch it like what you see in the picture. So I had my photographer with me, and because of the lighting, he really wanted me to launch it the wrong direction. So I'm actually I'm launching it toward the power lines that are behind our pit area. So I'm launching it unusually steeply to clear the power lines. That certainly is not necessary under normal conditions. Just launch it a little bit above level and just let her go. But other than that, it's with the 3-cell battery, it flies really well. It's certainly beyond scale. It's quite a bit faster than scale. We'll do all the maneuvers that you could ask for. On a 2-cell battery, it'll come in a little bit lighter. Of course, it'll have a bit less power, but for flying around in a small area, the 2-cell is plenty. But the 3-cell is a lot of fun.
Approximately, Paul, what kind of flight times are you getting on it?
On that one, it's got a 9. Let me see. No, actually, it's got a 500 milliamp battery in it, and with that, I got 5-minute flights, and I wasn't even getting to the halfway point on those batteries. I didn't fly it a ton because I was just trying to fly it enough to get some good photos for the magazine, and then keep it on reserve. But so I can't tell you exactly how many electrons I can wring out of it, but it looks like 8-minute flights are very doable. 10 if you're not really keeping it to the firewall.
Well, I'm curious to ask you a question about, obviously you did an article about the tools that someone would need or generally would need to build an aircraft. For you, obviously you need a number of tools to build an airplane, but for you, is there basically a tool, either a tool you can't live without, or is there a tool that, someone might not think of as a tool to use to build model aircraft? Maybe it's something that they made themselves, or that they took some tool and made it work for model aircraft. Which one would you touch on? I'm always curious to hear that. Which would, or if you feel strongly about both, what would both be?
Well, the must-have, and this has been true forever, but the must-have is the your basic number 11 hobby knife. Actually, I brought mine to work the other day, and I needed it for something there, and someone borrowed it on the permanent basis, so I guess I need another one. But man, I've been missing that. That's a must-have. Good sanding block, just one of those extruded aluminum sanding bars, something like that is really good. And then the third thing, if you like the type of building that I do, which is the old school builds with a lot of stringers, you need a stripping tool, and that old tool that Master Airscrew developed 1 million years ago is worth its weight in gold. You can get one for about $7, I think. But for me, those 3 tools, I can do an awful lot. Stuff you might not think of. That's a good question. I don't really have much in the way of tricky tools. It's just some real basic stuff. I can tell you one thing that I've been coveting, and you had an article on it recently, but there's a little baby table saw. I don't remember the author of that article, but they wrote about a table saw that they had. I think they
Yes,
got it secondhand and reconditioned it. And
that was Greg Gimlick.
That's right. I knew it was somebody that I should have known, but that's something that I would like to splurge and add that to my collection of tools.
Well, I see we're just about out of time, so I want to give you a chance. I mean, obviously it's been a great conversation, but I want to give you a chance if there's anything else you want to share about any of your projects, or working on the magazine, or you did kind of give a little sneak peek at your next project. So I want to give you a moment or two, Paul, if there's anything you'd like to share that we haven't touched on.
Well, that's a good question. Something occurs to me now. I probably should have asked you in advance, but when I go to our club meetings, which sadly I haven't been going to for a while, we haven't had a whole lot of them since COVID, but we've started up again. But I've been busy for that. But anyways, I do get asked from time to time. People just, how did you get in the magazine? I've got a cool project, and I'd like to be in the magazine. I haven't asked you directly, but I'm assuming that it can be a challenge to find enough good content to fill up the pages month after month. So usually I tell people, just do it. Just, if you feel comfortable writing a little bit, be descriptive. And if you can take photos or find a friend to take some photos, use another article as a template and give it a stab. But I know a lot of great builders here in Sonoma County, and their work puts mine to shame, and I'd be pleased to read about what they're doing in your magazine. So that's one thing I would say is give it a shot. I'm not, I really didn't have a special in or anything other than just having made a connection with somebody that we knew in common. But I don't have specialized magazine writing skills. But I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there that have something they'd like to share.
We're more than happy to have people reach out that want to share projects with us, or as I said, we're looking for a lot of club information for next year. So yeah, if anybody, whether it's a construction feature or event coverage or how to, or a way to help our clubs, or any content that, or if maybe we also have Focal Point where people share their projects, and we have Viewfinder. So we and we have I Am the AMA. So we're definitely interested. So yes, definitely, if you're interested in participating in the magazine or providing content for the magazine, email me or call me, reach out to me, and I would definitely like to talk to everyone about their project, because I mean, as you said, Paul, we want to share the joy of the hobby, and there's so many things that people can provide us with, tips and tricks and information that we definitely want to do that. So I'm glad that you suggest people go ahead and do that, and I definitely want to hear from them. And we can't have too many construction articles. I love construction articles. I created the October issue to be the build issue when I took over as the editor, and we've been doing that for about 12 years. And I always look forward to that. And I always try to make the October issue look like, in a way, what the magazine would have looked at like before ARFs and Ready to Flies. And not that there's anything wrong with ARFs or Ready to Flies, but I just wanted to have one issue that was dedicated to building. So that's why in that issue, you'll never see an ARF or Ready to Fly reviewed. It's all kits. All the reviews are kits. And we try to focus all on building, because I figure that issue comes out in mid to late September, depending on if you get print or digital. It's the perfect time to talk about building and let people think about their next project. And then I partnered with our plan service to offer a discount. So I hope between the free digital plans and the discounts that we offer, that we can get people excited about building and take on a project. So we're absolutely happy to do that. Appreciate, Paul, all that you've done for the magazine and all the articles you provided. Look forward to continuing to work with you as you do other fighter face-offs, and I'll be really excited if one of them's World War I. But I'll leave that to you and Derek. But I love World War I. I've got one behind me and one above me, and so hopefully that'll be something you do at some point.
Well, I'd definitely like to do that. So yeah, it's not impossible.
Right. Well, we're definitely gonna want to share those when you do, and anybody who decides to take on any of your projects or any of Derek's projects or any project in the magazine, keep in mind that we do print in the magazine the email address of the person who designed the aircraft. And so you can ask questions. As Paul said, he's happy to get those questions. I also want to remind people that the next show next month, it's going to be on October 15th. So that's going to be a busy day for us at AMA, because on October 15th will also be AMA Air. So this is now the second time this has happened where we're going to have both shows. They happen to fall on the same day. So hopefully you'll be able to stay with us and tune into both. But the next episode will be Friday, October 15th, and I will look forward to seeing you all then. Paul, again, thank you so very much for coming on, and look forward to seeing everyone next month.
Thanks, Jay. It's been fun.